Have you ever wondered what it would take to command over 80,000 pirates and rule the seas with an iron fist? Well, the answer isn't what you'd expect. Most people think of pirates as raggedy men with eye patches and wooden legs. But the most powerful pirate in history was actually a woman who built an empire so vast that the Chinese government had no choice but to negotiate with her as an equal. In this video, I'm going to reveal the incredible true story of ChingShih, the pirate queen who controlled the South China Sea and commanded more ships than most national navies. This is a story that Hollywood couldn't make up, filled with political intrigue, naval warfare, and a brilliant woman who outsmarted emperors and admirals. But here's what makes this even more fascinating. After I tell you her unbelievable story, I'm going to take you into the forgotten world of Chinese piracy, where entire families lived their whole lives on floating cities, and pirates operated like corporations with their own laws, currencies, and governments. The year is 1801, and China is in chaos. The Qing dynasty is struggling with corruption, rebellion, and foreign pressure. Trade routes through the Pearl River are incredibly lucrative, but they're also dangerous. Pirates have been operating in these waters for centuries, but they've always been fractured, fighting each other as much as they fight the Imperial Navy. That's about to change forever. Our story begins not with ChingShih herself, but with her husband, Zheng Yi. Now, Zheng Yi wasn't just any pirate captain. He was born into one of the most powerful pirate families in southern China, a family that had been raiding these waters for generations. But Zheng Yi had a vision that no pirate leader before him had ever imagined. He wanted to unite all the pirate gangs under one massive confederation. Think about how difficult this would be. These weren't just business competitors. These were blood enemies who had been killing each other for decades. Each group had their own territory, their own customs, their own reasons for hating the others. But Zheng Yi was a master politician. Through a combination of strategic marriages, military victories, and pure charisma, he managed to bring together the major pirate factions into what became known as the Confederation of the Coast. By 1805, this confederation controlled over 300 junks and commanded nearly 20,000 pirates. They had their own admirals, their own territory, and their own laws. The imperial government was terrified because suddenly, instead of dealing with dozens of small pirate bands, they were facing what amounted to a floating nation with its own navy. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. In 1807, Zheng Yi suddenly dies. Now, in most pirate organizations, this would mean civil war. The Confederation would fragment back into competing factions, and everything Zheng Yi had built would collapse. The vultures were already circling. Rival captains started making their moves, positioning themselves to grab pieces of the empire. But they hadn't counted on Zheng Yi's widow. Now, we don't know a lot about ChingShih's early life, and that's actually pretty typical for women in this period. What we do know is that she was likely born around 1775, possibly worked as a courtesan, and was incredibly intelligent. Some sources suggest she was captured by pirates and married Zheng Yi, while others claim she chose to marry him for political reasons. What matters is what happened next. When Zheng Yi died, ChingShih moved faster than anyone expected. She immediately claimed guardianship over her stepson, Zheng Yi's heir, and positioned herself as regent of the Confederation. But this wasn't just a ceremonial role. She was making it clear that she intended to rule. The other pirate captains probably thought this was temporary. They figured they'd humor the widow for a few weeks while they sorted out the real succession. They had no idea what they were dealing with. Within months, ChingShih had outmaneuvered every rival claimant. She formed strategic alliances with key captains, eliminated threats through a combination of diplomacy and violence, and most importantly, she proved that she could lead. The Confederation didn't just survive under her leadership, it thrived. By 1809, just 2 years after her husband's death, ChingShih commanded over 1,800 vessels and between 70 and 80,000 pirates. Let me put that in perspective for you. The entire British Royal Navy at this time had around 600 ships. The United States Navy had maybe 40 vessels. This woman controlled a fleet that dwarfed most national navies. But raw numbers don't tell the whole story. What made ChingShih truly remarkable was how she organized this massive confederation. She didn't just rule through fear or charisma. She created a sophisticated governmental system that would have impressed political theorists. The confederation was organized into 6 main fleets, each identified by colored flags. The Black Flag Fleet was the largest and most powerful, commanded by ChingShih's ally and eventual second husband, Zhang Yi. The Red Flag Fleet controlled the Pearl River approaches. The yellow, blue, white, and green flag fleets each had their own territories and specialties. Each fleet operated semi-independently, but they all answered to ChingShih's central authority. She created a complex system of laws that governed everything from the treatment of captives to the distribution of loot. Pirates who raped captives without permission faced execution. Deserters were hunted down and killed. But pirates who followed the rules were rewarded with shares of the profits and protection from imperial forces. This wasn't just a criminal organization, it was a functioning government. The Confederation issued safe passage documents to merchant ships willing to pay taxes. They maintained diplomatic relations with Portuguese authorities in Macau. They even had their own currency and banking system. The imperial government was completely overwhelmed. Their navy was no match for ChingShih's forces, and traditional military tactics were useless against an enemy that could disappear into the countless islands and channels of the Pearl River Delta. The pirates controlled all the major waterways, which meant they controlled trade. And trade was the lifeblood of the Chinese economy. By 1810, the situation had become desperate for the imperial government. ChingShih's forces were essentially blockading Canton, one of China's most important ports. Merchant ships couldn't move without paying tribute to the pirates. The Imperial Navy was afraid to leave port. Local officials were secretly negotiating with pirate captains because they had no other choice. But ChingShih wasn't content to just collect tribute and raid merchant ships. She had bigger ambitions. She wanted legitimacy. She wanted recognition. She wanted to transform her confederation from a criminal enterprise into something that could negotiate with the imperial government as an equal. This is where her political genius really shines through. Instead of continuing to fight an unwinnable war against the imperial forces, she began sending diplomatic messages to Beijing. She positioned herself not as a rebel or a criminal, but as the leader of a maritime confederation that was willing to discuss terms. The imperial government was caught completely off guard by this approach. They were used to dealing with pirates as criminals who needed to be destroyed. They had no framework for negotiating with what amounted to an independent naval power, but they also couldn't ignore the reality that ChingShih controlled the seas. What happened next was one of the most remarkable diplomatic achievements in Chinese history. Over the course of several months in 1810 and 1811, ChingShih negotiated directly with imperial representatives. She wasn't asking for mercy or amnesty. She was demanding recognition and favorable terms for her people. The final agreement was extraordinary. ChingShih would surrender most of her fleet to the imperial government, but her captains and crews would be incorporated into the imperial navy with their ranks intact. She personally would retain command of over 200 ships and nearly 20,000 followers. The imperial government would pay her confederation salaries and provide official positions for her officers. Think about what this means. The Chinese government essentially hired the pirates and put them in charge of naval security. ChingShih had transformed her criminal enterprise into a legitimate military force and secured official recognition for herself and her people. But the most remarkable part of the agreement was what ChingShih personally received. She was granted the title of Imperial Admiral and given control of a significant portion of the imperial fleet. She went from being an outlaw to being one of the most powerful naval commanders in the Chinese Empire. After the agreement was signed, ChingShih largely disappeared from historical records, which is typical for women of this period. Some sources suggest she returned to Canton and operated a gambling house and brothel. Others claim she remained involved in maritime trade and politics. What we know for certain